It all started with what should have been a routine visit to the urologist. I had been experiencing some discomfort, and after a few consultations and tests, the doctor dropped the bombshell. I had a sexually transmitted disease. My mind spun. I'd been faithful to my wife, Samantha, for over a decade. It didn't make any sense. As I sat there, numb from the news, the pieces slowly began to fall into place. The doctor was still talking, explaining treatment options, but I wasn't listening. My thoughts were elsewhere. On Samantha, her sudden late nights at work, her increased interest in tennis, and the suspicious smile she wore after her Saturday sessions with the new tennis coach. The signs were all there, weren't they? I had just been too blind, too trusting, to see them. On the way home, I couldn't stop replaying our recent conversations. She had joined a tennis club about a year ago. It was harmless at first. She even encouraged me to come along, but I was never one for tennis, and I had a full plate at work. As the months went by, her commitment to the sport seemed to deepen. More lessons, more weekends spent at the club, and her growing admiration for Jason, her coach. Jason, I had met him a couple of times. He was younger, charming, and had that athlete's physique that women seem to notice. Samantha mentioned him often, too often. Jason says my backhand is improving, she would say with that coy smile. I dismissed it back then as her excitement for the sport. But now, with this diagnosis, every memory felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. Once I got home, I sat in the car, staring at the front door of the house we had built together. It was hard to accept that the life I thought was perfect had a dark undercurrent of betrayal. I couldn't confront her just yet. I needed proof, cold, undeniable evidence. So, I waited. I watched. Over the next few weeks, I began to observe Samantha with a new lens. When she said she was going to the club, I followed her. At first, she drove straight there, parking in her usual spot. I thought I might be overreacting, that maybe I was wrong, and then one Saturday afternoon, it happened. She was supposed to be at the club for her regular session, but her car wasn't there. I circled the area, growing anxious. After a few minutes, I noticed a silver sedan pull up in front of a nearby cafe. It was Jason. My heart sank when I saw Samantha step out of the passenger seat, smiling, her arm playfully brushing against his. They entered the cafe, looking like any other couple on a date. My stomach churned. Instead of confronting them, I drove away. I needed more than just a sighting. I needed solid proof that couldn't be denied. My next move was installing a hidden GPS tracker in her car and placing a small recording device in her tennis bag. Every part of me hated the thought of stooping this low, but the need for answers outweighed my pride. That night, I acted normal. Samantha and I ate dinner with our two kids, and I even managed to smile when she told me about her great session at the tennis club. But my mind was racing with thoughts of what else had happened that day. I barely slept, thinking about the conversation that would destroy our family. The next morning, I reviewed the GPS data and the audio recordings. It wasn't just a cafe. There were other locations, hotels, private residences. As for the recordings, my heart shattered when I heard Samantha's voice, unmistakably affectionate, speaking to Jason. "Today was amazing," she whispered. "I can't wait until next time." My hand clenched the edge of the table, shaking with fury and despair. It was clear now. This wasn't just a casual fling. It was an affair. But I wasn't going to be the victim here. The man betrayed and left to pick up the pieces. If Samantha thought she could get away with this, she was mistaken. Samantha continued her routine, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. Over the next few days, I started piecing together a plan, something that would be meticulous, untraceable, and deeply personal. It wasn't enough to confront her and Jason. I wanted them to feel the weight of their betrayal. But first, I needed to gather more information. I spent my days at work, going through the motions, but my mind was consumed with the details of my revenge. At night, after Samantha went to bed, I would sit in my study, poring over the GPS logs and recordings. There were many more clandestine meetings than I'd initially suspected. Each discovery fueled my anger, but it also sharpened my focus. The recordings, in particular, revealed the extent of their relationship. It wasn't just physical. Samantha had an emotional connection with Jason, which somehow made it worse. Listening to her voice, the same voice that once whispered love to me, now confide in another man, it was like being stabbed over and over. Still, I kept up appearances. I had learned long ago that the best way to trap someone was to make them feel safe, comfortable. And Samantha was entirely comfortable. She had no idea that I knew about her affair. No clue that I had already started pulling the strings of my revenge. I started by making subtle changes at home. Things she wouldn't notice at first, but would come to question later. First, I began to discreetly alter our finances. We shared several accounts, but I had always kept one in my name only, an emergency fund, if you will. I started funneling small amounts of money into that account, just enough to build a cushion. Samantha never checked the finances, so I wasn't worried about her noticing. Then, I began to plant small doubts in her mind. Nothing major, just the occasional comment that would seem harmless on the surface, but would linger in her subconscious. "You've been at the tennis club a lot lately," I said one evening over dinner. She was halfway through a glass of wine, and her expression froze for just a second before she smiled. "Yeah, it's been really fun. Jason's really helped me improve." "I can tell," I said, my voice neutral. "Just make sure you're not overworking yourself. You don't want to get burned out." Samantha laughed it off, but I saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I made a mental note to keep laying these small traps. The goal was to keep her off balance, to make her feel just the slightest bit paranoid. Then came phase 2, Jason. I didn't know much about him, but from what Samantha had let slip, I knew enough to start digging. A quick search through some of his social media profiles gave me the basics. He was single, had recently moved to town, and seemed to have a good reputation as a coach. But like anyone with a past, Jason had secrets. It didn't take long before I found a few questionable details. A messy breakup, rumors of inappropriate behavior with a former student, and even a small legal dispute from years back. Perfect. With this information in hand, I paid a visit to one of Jason's old employers, an out-of-town tennis club where he had worked before moving here. I posed as a concerned husband wanting to hire Jason for private lessons. The manager was more than happy to spill the details of Jason's departure, which, according to him, involved some unwanted attention toward a married client. It was the exact leverage I needed. If I could connect the dots between Jason's past indiscretions and his affair with Samantha, it wouldn't just be a private matter anymore. It could ruin his reputation, possibly his career. And Samantha, caught in the crossfire, would face the humiliation of everyone knowing her part in this sordid affair. The next step was crucial. I set up a fake email address, posing as a woman who had recently discovered some disturbing information about Jason's behavior. I crafted a message and sent it to the tennis club where he currently worked, implying that there had been multiple instances of inappropriate conduct with female clients, including my own personal experience. Of course, I couldn't send this to the tennis club directly. I forwarded it through an anonymous mailer service, leaving no trace of it coming from me. Within days, I began hearing whispers through the local tennis community. Rumors were spreading. Jason was under suspicion, and it wouldn't be long before it reached Samantha. Meanwhile, at home, I continued to play the perfect husband. I made more of an effort with the kids, took care of extra chores, and even surprised Samantha with a weekend getaway, a trip to a secluded cabin a few hours from home. She seemed thrilled, touched even, that I was being so attentive. Little did she know, the trip was just another part of my plan. During the weekend getaway, I acted like the doting husband. We hiked, cooked dinner together, and even shared a few intimate moments. I wanted to lull her into a false sense of security, to make her believe everything was perfect. I needed her to think that I was completely unaware of her affair with Jason, that her secret was still safe. But on the last night of the trip, I made a subtle slip. As we sat in front of the fireplace, sipping wine, I casually mentioned that I had bumped into one of the tennis moms at the grocery store. She asked about you. I said, watching Samantha's face closely. Mentioned you've been spending a lot of time with Jason. Samantha's hand froze around her wine glass. She tried to play it off, but I could see the nervous flicker in her eyes. "Oh, really?" she asked, her voice too light. "What did you say?" "I told her you're really committed to improving your game," I replied, pretending not to notice her tension. But it got me thinking, when's the last time we played tennis together? Samantha blinked, caught off guard by the sudden question. I don't know, you've never really been into it. Maybe it's time I give it another shot, I said, leaning back with a smile. Maybe I should get a few lessons with Jason, too. Her expression tightened. She forced a laugh. You? Tennis? I don't think that's your thing. Maybe not, I conceded, but it could be fun to try something new. Who knows? I might even surprise you. The rest of the evening passed in tense silence. Samantha didn't say much, and I could tell her mind was racing. The seed of doubt had been planted. The following week, I escalated my plan. I needed to push Samantha further, to make her nervous enough to slip up. I made sure to drop more hints about my potential interest in tennis, casually mentioning how I might stop by the club to watch one of her lessons. Samantha became more distant, her once carefree attitude replaced by subtle paranoia. She was starting to sense something was wrong, but she didn't know just how deep my plan went. The trap was closing, and I couldn't wait to watch it spring. By now, Samantha was visibly uneasy. She was trying to maintain her facade of normalcy, but the strain was starting to show. Her laughter seemed forced, her smile too bright. I could see it in the way she hesitated before leaving for the tennis club, as if she were waiting for me to ask more questions. But I didn't. I kept playing the oblivious husband, patiently waiting for the right moment to pull the rug out from under her. In the meantime, the rumors I had seeded about Jason had started to take root. There was a noticeable tension at the tennis club, a subtle shift in the way people talked about him. I overheard bits and pieces during casual conversations, whispers of impropriety, of past indiscretions that were resurfacing. Jason had no idea that I was the one behind it all, and it wasn't long before it started affecting his lessons. One evening, after Samantha had returned from the club, I casually asked her about Jason. Everything still going well at tennis? I inquired as we cleaned up after dinner. Samantha froze, but quickly recovered, giving a tight smile. Yeah, everything's fine. Why? I shrugged, keeping my tone light. Just curious. I heard from one of the guys at work that there's been some drama at the club. Something about Jason? Her hand jerked, nearly dropping the plate she was washing. I noticed the brief panic in her eyes, and it took all my willpower not to smirk. Oh, really? She said too casually. What kind of drama? Just rumors, I think, I said, turning away so she wouldn't see the satisfaction on my face. Apparently, some of the women are saying he's been getting a little too close to his students. Samantha's expression darkened, and for a moment, I thought she was going to confront me. But she bit her lip and kept quiet, clearly rattled. The next morning, I got confirmation that my plan was working. I received an anonymous email from the tennis club stating that Jason had been temporarily suspended, pending an internal investigation. The rumor mill had done its job, and the club was taking the allegations seriously. Samantha didn't mention any of this when she returned from her tennis session that day. In fact, she seemed more distracted than ever. I decided to give her a little push. So, I said casually over dinner, "Did you hear anything about Jason being suspended?" Samantha's fork clattered against her plate. She stared at me for a second, her face pale. "Where did you hear that?" she asked, her voice strained. I shrugged. "It's been going around. Apparently, someone complained about him. I thought you'd know since you're, well, pretty close with him." Samantha's eyes flickered with panic, but she quickly masked it with a weak smile. "Yeah, I heard something about it at the club today. It's probably just a misunderstanding." "Oh, I'm sure," I replied, pretending to be nonchalant. Still, it's crazy how these things can spiral out of control. People start talking, and suddenly everyone's looking at you differently. She nodded, but I could tell she was barely holding it together. I let the conversation drop, satisfied that the pressure was mounting. That night, after Samantha went to bed, I retrieved the recordings from the bug in her tennis bag. The audio was shaky, mostly background noise, but there was one clear conversation that made my blood run cold. It was a heated exchange between Samantha and Jason, recorded just hours before his suspension. "We need to stop," Samantha had whispered, her voice trembling. "Stop what?" Jason sounded annoyed. "This us," she said. "People are talking, Jason. It's not safe anymore." Jason scoffed. "So now you're scared? It's a little late for that, don't you think?" "I can't do this," she insisted. "Gary's been asking questions. He's getting suspicious." I paused the recording, feeling a mix of anger and satisfaction. She was right to be scared. But I wasn't going to let her off that easily. I continued listening, my jaw tightening with every word. "You think he knows?" Jason asked. "I don't know. He keeps bringing you up, asking about the club. He's never shown any interest in tennis before. And now he's suddenly curious about you? It's too risky." Jason's voice was calm, but there was an edge of frustration. "Look, this is just a rough patch. I'll get through the investigation, and everything will go back to normal. You're not going to leave me now, are you?" There was a long silence before Samantha spoke again. "I don't know, Jason. This is too much." I stopped the recording and sat back, thinking. Samantha was starting to crack, and Jason was clearly feeling the heat from the investigation. It was the perfect time to strike. The next step was crucial. I needed to make sure Samantha's world fell apart completely, without any warning. I had been biding my time, but now it was time to set the final part of my plan into motion. A few days later, I made my move. I had found a small burner phone online and set up a fake number. Using that, I sent Jason a text pretending to be Samantha. "I need to see you tonight. It's urgent. Meet me at the motel on Route 6. I knew Jason wouldn't be able to resist. He was cocky, sure of himself, and too arrogant to see what was coming. As expected, he responded quickly. "See you there at 8. With everything set, I sent a similar message to Samantha, pretending to be Jason. "Need to talk. Meet me at the motel on Route 6 at 8. Don't tell anyone." It was a simple but effective trap. I could already picture the scene. Both of them showing up, expecting to meet each other, only to find out they'd been played. But I wasn't done yet. The real kicker was what came next. Before I left the house that evening, I sent an anonymous email to the local news tip line. "Suspended tennis coach meeting with a married woman for an affair. Motel on Route 6. You might want to send a camera." I smiled to myself as I closed my laptop. With luck, there would be a reporter or photographer staking out the motel, ready to capture the sordid affair in full view. And even if they didn't show, the damage was already done. The mere presence of cameras would be enough to shatter any illusion of secrecy. By 7:45, I was parked a safe distance from the motel, watching as the pieces fell into place. Jason arrived first, pulling up in his silver sedan. He looked around nervously before heading inside. 10 minutes later, Samantha's car rolled into the lot. I watched as she hesitated, glancing around before reluctantly stepping out of the car. I stayed in my car, heart pounding with anticipation. It wasn't long before I saw a news van pull up at the edge of the parking lot, its camera aimed squarely at the motel. Samantha disappeared into the room, unaware of the eyes on her. And just like that, my trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the fallout. From my vantage point in the car, I watched the drama unfold. It felt surreal, almost cinematic, like I was sitting in a theater, watching a disaster that had been scripted to perfection. But this wasn't a movie. This was my life, and Samantha had made her choices. Now, she and Jason were about to pay the price. It was almost 8:30 when I saw the first flash of panic. The door to the motel room flew open, and Jason stormed out, looking around wildly. Samantha followed a few seconds later, her face pale as a sheet. They stood outside, exchanging frantic words, clearly realizing that they had both been duped into coming here. And then, the cameras flashed. The news crew, who had been waiting in the shadows, pounced. The reporter hurried over with a cameraman trailing behind her, microphone thrust toward Jason as she asked rapid-fire questions. "Jason, is it true you've been having an affair with one of your students? Is this why you were suspended from the tennis club?" Samantha looked frozen, her hands trembling as she tried to shield her face from the cameras. Jason, on the other hand, was seething. He shoved the microphone away, barking at the reporter, but it only fueled their curiosity. They kept pressing, kept filming, and I could almost hear the headlines forming in their minds. Samantha finally broke free, stumbling toward her car, but the damage was already done. Jason stood there, helpless and furious, as the reporter fired one last question. "How long have you been involved with this woman, Jason? Does the tennis club know?" He didn't answer. He just glared at the camera before turning on his heel and stomping back inside the motel room, slamming the door behind him. I sat in my car, watching the scene play out with a mixture of satisfaction and grim resolve. They deserved every bit of this, but I wasn't done yet. I hadn't confronted Samantha directly, and that was the final piece of my revenge. The public humiliation was one thing, but the personal confrontation, that would be the blow that truly shattered her world. As Samantha sped away from the motel, I followed her at a distance, keeping just enough space between us to avoid being noticed. I knew where she was going, back to our home, the one we had built together. The irony wasn't lost on me. She thought she could return to that house, to the life we had, like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. By the time I arrived home, Samantha's car was already in the driveway. I parked around the corner, giving myself a moment to steady my nerves. I wasn't sure how I would feel when I finally confronted her. Anger, sadness, or maybe just emptiness. All I knew was that this confrontation was necessary. It was time for her to know that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of Samantha's sobs coming from the living room. I followed the noise, finding her sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. She didn't notice me at first, too consumed by her own despair. "Samantha," I said, my voice steady. Her head snapped up, eyes wide and red from crying. She looked at me with a mix of guilt and fear, knowing that the moment of reckoning had finally come. "Gary," her voice was barely a whisper. "I can explain." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the quiet room. "Explain? Oh, I can't wait to hear this." She stood up, her hands trembling as she reached out toward me. "Please, it's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like," I repeated, my voice rising. "I know exactly what it is, Samantha. I've known for weeks." Her face went pale, and she stumbled back as if I'd physically struck her. "What do you mean? How?" "I know about you and Jason. I know about the hotels, the texts, everything. You thought you were so clever, didn't you? Hiding it behind tennis lessons, sneaking around, but you got sloppy." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The weight of her lies hung heavy in the air between us, suffocating. I didn't want it to be true. I continued, my voice thick with emotion. "But then the doctor told me I had an STD, and that's when it all started to make sense. That's when I realized just how long you've been lying to me." Tears streamed down her face now, but I felt no sympathy. Not anymore. She had betrayed me, and now she was paying the price. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just, don't." I cut her off. "Don't you dare try to make this sound like some kind of accident. You knew what you were doing every step of the way. You made a choice." She broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her cry, feeling a strange detachment from the scene. This woman, who had been my wife, my partner, the mother of my children, was a stranger to me now. "I gave you everything," I said quietly. "I trusted you. I loved you. And you threw it all away for what? Some fling with your tennis coach." Samantha sank to the floor, her hands clutching the edge of the couch as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. "I don't know why I did it," she sobbed. "I don't know. I'm so sorry, Gary. Please, please don't leave me." Her words hung in the air, desperate and hollow. "Leave you?" I repeated, shaking my head. "Oh, Samantha, you're the one who left me a long time ago. You just didn't have the guts to admit it." She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face pleading for forgiveness, but there was no redemption here. "Not for her. Not for Jason. I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said coldly. "Divorce papers will be served by the end of the week. And just so you know, I'm taking full custody of the kids." She gasped, her eyes widening in panic. "No. Gary, please don't take the kids from me. I'll do anything. We can fix this. I'll end it with Jason. We can go to counseling. Just please don't take them." I stared at her for a long moment. The woman I once loved reduced to this broken, desperate shell. There was no going back. "Goodbye, Samantha." I turned and walked out of the living room, the sound of her sobs trailing behind me. The house felt heavy with the weight of everything that had happened, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. Outside, I leaned against my car, taking a deep breath. It was over. I had my revenge. Samantha's life was in ruins, Jason's reputation was in tatters, and I was finally free of the lies. But as the night closed in around me, I couldn't shake the hollow feeling that had settled in my chest. Revenge had been sweet, but it had also left me empty. There was no joy in it, no satisfaction, only the cold, hard reality that the life I had known was gone. The days that followed were a strange blur. I had expected some kind of finality after confronting Samantha, but the truth was, the aftermath of the confrontation felt like walking through the ruins of a life that once was. The silence in the house was heavy, almost oppressive, as if it had absorbed all the lies and betrayal that had unfolded within its walls. The kids were staying with Samantha's parents for a few days, giving me space to sort things out. I had filed for divorce, just as I'd promised. The papers would be served soon, and there would be no escaping the reality of what had happened. Samantha hadn't spoken to me since that night. She was staying with a friend, likely hiding from the fallout. I could only imagine the humiliation she was enduring, not just from the affair being exposed, but from the media attention surrounding Jason's suspension. The rumors were spreading like wildfire. I sat in my study, scrolling through news articles that hinted at Jason's involvement in inappropriate relationships with his students. No names were mentioned, but anyone who knew the situation could connect the dots. The investigation into his behavior was still ongoing, and more women had come forward with accusations. It seemed that Samantha was just one of many in Jason's string of affairs. A small part of me felt vindicated, knowing that both of them were suffering the consequences of their actions. But another part of me, an unexpected part, felt hollow. The revenge I had plotted with such precision, the scheme that had come together so perfectly, didn't feel as satisfying as I had imagined it would. The coldness that had fueled my every move was now replaced with an emptiness I hadn't anticipated. I was deep in thought when my phone buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Jason." I stared at the message for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Jason, the man who had destroyed my marriage, the man I had set up to ruin himself, wanted to talk? I felt a surge of anger, but also a flicker of curiosity. What could he possibly want from me now? After a few moments of hesitation, I replied, "There's nothing to talk about." I didn't expect an immediate response, but within seconds, my phone buzzed again. "You think you've won, but you don't know the whole story. Meet me at the tennis courts tonight. 9 p.m. A chill ran down my spine. What did he mean, the whole story? I hadn't considered the possibility that there was more to this than I already knew. My plan had been airtight. I had exposed their affair, destroyed Jason's reputation, and shattered Samantha's life. What else could there be? Against my better judgment, I decided to meet him. I needed to know what he was talking about, even if it was just another desperate attempt to manipulate the situation. Whatever it was, I wanted to hear it directly from him. At 8:45, I grabbed my jacket and left the house, heading to the tennis courts where Samantha had spent countless hours pretending everything was fine. The air was crisp, the night unusually quiet. When I arrived, Jason was already there, standing near the entrance to the courts. He looked different, disheveled, his usual arrogance replaced with a haunted look in his eyes. I approached slowly, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Jason?" He glanced at me, his face etched with frustration. "I'm not here to apologize. I know you don't want to hear that, but there's something you need to know." I crossed my arms, unwilling to let him see the slight tremor of unease I felt. "Get on with it." Jason took a deep breath and looked me square in the eye. Samantha wasn't the only one having an affair. I blinked, caught off guard. "What the hell are you talking about?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's not the only one who was lying. You think I'm the bad guy, but she wasn't just cheating on you. She's been using you for years." A pit formed in my stomach, and I clenched my fists. "You're lying." "No," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "She told me everything, about how she only stayed with you for the money, for the stability. She's been planning to leave you for months, but she was trying to figure out how to get the most out of the divorce." I stared at him, struggling to process what he was saying. Could Samantha have really been plotting behind my back for longer than I knew? Was this whole thing just a power play for financial gain? "You're full of it," I spat. "She wouldn't." I didn't believe it at first either, Jason interrupted, stepping closer. But I overheard her talking to her friend. She was never going to stay with you. She was just waiting for the right time to leave with as much as she could get. His words hit me like a freight train. I had always known something was off, but I had convinced myself that it was about the affair, that her betrayal was rooted in desire, in something physical. But this was worse. This was cold, calculated manipulation. And if what Jason was saying was true, then everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie. I took a deep breath, trying to regain control. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Jason laughed bitterly. Because I'm done. This whole thing is a mess. My career's ruined. My reputation's destroyed. And for what? Some woman who was just using me too? I'm not the only one she played, Gary. She played both of us. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. There was a part of me that didn't want to believe him, that wanted to hold on to the idea that Samantha's betrayal was about love, or lack of it. But as Jason's words sank in, I realized that it made too much sense. Samantha had always been careful, always meticulous about money and appearances. It wasn't hard to imagine her plotting an escape, one that left her with the upper hand. I turned away from Jason, staring out at the empty tennis courts. The whole world felt like it was collapsing around me, but I couldn't let him see the full impact of his words. I needed time to process everything, time to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. So, what now? I asked, my voice hollow. Jason shrugged. That's up to you. But I thought you should know. Whatever you're planning, just remember that she's not the victim here. You're not the only one she's been lying to. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. As I walked away from the courts, my mind was spinning. Samantha had manipulated me, used me, and now I was left with nothing but the broken pieces of a life I thought was real. But even though I felt shattered, a new resolve began to form. I wasn't done. Not yet. The drive home felt like a blur, my mind racing with Jason's words. I wanted to hate him, to see him as the villain in this story, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized he wasn't wrong. Samantha's betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined, and the truth was she had been playing both of us. The affair wasn't just a fling, it was part of a bigger plan. I had been so focused on revenge, so consumed by anger, that I hadn't seen the full picture. When I got home, I went straight to my study, closing the door behind me. I needed to think, to piece together everything that had happened over the past few months. Jason's revelation was unsettling, but the more I thought about it, the more it explained Samantha's recent behavior. Her coldness, her sudden interest in the finances, the way she had distanced herself emotionally, it was all part of a plan. She had been setting the stage for a long time, and I had been too blind to see it. I sat down at my desk, my hands shaking slightly as I logged into our joint bank account. The numbers stared back at me, but something felt off. There had been a lot of small transfers over the past year, amounts that seemed insignificant on their own, but added up over time. Samantha had been slowly moving money into an account I hadn't noticed before, one that was in her name only. A bitter taste rose in my throat. She had been siphoning off funds, preparing for the day she would leave me, likely with a substantial chunk of our savings. It was all coming together now. The affair, the money, her calculated coldness. It wasn't just about Jason. It was about setting herself up for an easy escape, one where she'd walk away with everything while leaving me with nothing. But now that I knew her game, I wasn't going to let her win. I spent the next few hours researching divorce laws, financial loopholes, and how to protect myself from Samantha's planned heist. I needed to act fast. If she was planning to leave me, I had to make sure she didn't take everything with her. There were legal ways to freeze joint accounts, to protect assets before they could be divided. It was a complicated process, but with the right lawyer, I could turn the tables on her. The next morning, I made an appointment with the best divorce attorney in town, a woman named Meredith Turner. She had a reputation for being ruthless in court, and I needed someone like that on my side. As I sat in her office, I laid everything out for her: the affair, the financial manipulation, the slow siphoning of funds. She listened carefully, her sharp eyes studying me as I spoke. "Gary," she said, leaning back in her chair, "you're in a better position than you think. If what you're telling me is true, Samantha has been preparing for a divorce for months, possibly even longer. But that works to your advantage. How? I asked, feeling more than a little skeptical. Because you can prove intent, Meredith explained. If she's been moving money into a private account, it's evidence that she's been planning this for a while. You can argue that she's been acting in bad faith, especially if the funds she's been taking are marital assets. It gives us grounds to freeze the accounts and contest any claims she might make for alimony or a larger share of the assets. Her words gave me hope, but I still felt the weight of Samantha's betrayal pressing down on me. She's been manipulating me this whole time, I muttered, more to myself than to Meredith. Meredith nodded. It's hard to face the truth, but now that you know, you can protect yourself. We'll file a motion to freeze the accounts immediately, and I'll start gathering evidence to support your case. In the meantime, I suggest you stay calm and don't confront her about the money yet. We don't want her getting suspicious before we've had a chance to lock things down. I agreed and left her office feeling a little more in control, but the emotional weight of everything still lingered. It was hard to accept that the woman I had spent over a decade with was capable of such cold calculation. As much as I wanted to confront her, to scream at her for what she'd done, I knew that wouldn't help. I needed to be smarter than that. This was about survival now, about making sure I didn't lose everything. That evening, Samantha returned home, her eyes puffy and red, evidence of more crying. She didn't say much, just walked past me and went straight to the bedroom. The tension between us was thick, but I pretended nothing was wrong, as Meredith had advised. As painful as it was to keep the charade up, I couldn't let Samantha know I was onto her plan. Not yet. I played the role of the indifferent husband, giving her space while I worked behind the scenes with Meredith. Over the next few days, we froze the joint accounts and moved the bulk of my savings into a trust, one that Samantha couldn't touch without my permission. Meredith was thorough, ensuring that all the financial moves were airtight. Samantha would be in for a shock when she realized her plan was unraveling. One night, as I sat in the living room pretending to watch TV, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the private investigator I had hired weeks ago, back when I first suspected Samantha's affair. I had asked him to dig into Jason's background, but now that I knew about the money, I had requested a deeper dive into Samantha's activities as well. The subject line read, "Found something interesting." Curiosity piqued. I opened the email and read through the report. My eyes widened as I scrolled through the findings. It wasn't just the affair or the secret bank account. Samantha had been in contact with a divorce lawyer, months before the affair had even started. The emails between her and the lawyer laid out her entire plan. Wait until the kids were older, manipulate me into staying in the marriage long enough to secure a significant payout, and then file for divorce, taking as much of the assets as she could. The affair with Jason wasn't even part of the original plan. It was just a convenient side distraction for her, something to pass the time while she set up her financial escape. She had planned on blindsiding me, filing for divorce once everything was in place, and leaving me with nothing but the remnants of a life that had been built on lies. I felt sick. My hands trembled as I set the phone down, the weight of the betrayal crashing down on me. All these years, I had been nothing more than a pawn in her game. And now, the only reason I was still standing was because I had uncovered the truth before it was too late. But this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about taking back control of my life, about making sure Samantha didn't walk away unscathed. I stood up, pacing the living room as the wheels in my mind turned. It was time to end this. I had played along long enough, but now I needed to take the final step. Samantha thought she had won, thought she could outsmart me, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The next morning, I called Meredith and told her to move forward with everything. File the papers, present the evidence, and hit Samantha with the full force of the law. I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal, to know that she had lost. But I wasn't just going to rely on the legal system to handle it. I had one last card to play, one that would make sure Samantha never saw me as the fool she had tried to manipulate. I had been patient. Now it was time for the final move. The morning after I made the call to Meredith, I sat in the kitchen, sipping my coffee and mentally preparing for what was coming. The divorce papers had been filed, the accounts were frozen, and Samantha's world was about to come crashing down. She had no idea that I was about to flip the script on her carefully laid plans. Samantha came into the kitchen, still wearing the same emotionally drained expression she'd worn for days. She glanced at me briefly, but said nothing as she poured herself a cup of coffee. There was an awkwardness between us, but she still didn't suspect that I knew about everything. Her affair, her plan to leave me, and the money she had been slowly siphoning away. I watched her from across the table, feeling a strange detachment. The woman standing before me was no longer my wife, not in the way I once thought. She was a stranger who had lied and manipulated me for years, and today, she would finally face the consequences of her actions. Around mid-morning, I received a text from Meredith. The papers had been served to Samantha's lawyer, and it wouldn't be long before she realized her game was up. I tried to stay calm, knowing the storm was about to hit. At noon it happened. I heard the soft ping of Samantha's phone from the living room. A few seconds later, I watched as she picked up her phone, her expression shifting from curiosity to confusion. She opened an email and read the contents, her brow furrowing. "What?" she muttered to herself, scrolling through the message. I stood in the doorway, silently watching as the realization slowly dawned on her. Her hand trembled as she set the phone down, her face growing pale. "Gary," she called, her voice strained. "We need to talk." I stepped into the room, keeping my expression neutral. "What's going on?" Samantha swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously. I just got an email from my lawyer. Something about divorce papers. But I didn't file anything." I stared at her, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and satisfaction. "No," I said quietly. "I filed them." Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she was speechless. You filed? But why?" I let the silence hang between us for a few seconds, letting the weight of my words sink in. "Because I know everything, Samantha." She blinked, confusion clouding her face. "What do you mean, everything?" "I know about you and Jason," I said, my voice low but steady. "I know about the affair. I know about the secret bank account. I know about the money you've been moving for the past year. And I know about your plan to divorce me and take everything. And now, you're not going to get away with any of it." Her face went completely white, and she stumbled back, as if my words had physically struck her. "No, Gary, I don't." I cut her off, taking a step closer. "Don't even try to lie to me anymore. It's over, Samantha. You've been caught." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked at me with a mixture of panic and desperation. "Gary, please. I can explain." "Explain?" I scoffed. "Explain what? That you've been planning to leave me for months? That you've been siphoning money from our accounts to fund your new life? Or maybe you want to explain how you've been screwing your tennis coach while pretending everything was fine between us." She flinched at my words, her tears spilling over now. "I wasn't." "Save it," I snapped. "I've heard enough lies from you to last a lifetime." Samantha's legs gave out, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I stood there, watching her cry, feeling nothing but cold indifference. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone who had tried to destroy me from the inside out. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "What? How long have you been planning this?" Samantha hesitated, then finally spoke, her voice trembling. I don't know. It started a year ago. I was unhappy, and I didn't know how to fix things between us. I thought if I just had an out, I could make things better for myself." I laughed bitterly. "So your solution was to betray me? To drain our accounts behind my back? To sleep with Jason and pretend like it didn't matter?" She wiped her eyes, shaking her head. "It wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I was just lost." "Lost?" I repeated, my anger boiling over. "You weren't lost, Samantha. You were calculating. You were cold. And now, you're going to face the consequences." I handed her a copy of the divorce papers, and she stared at them in disbelief. "You can't do this," she whispered. "You can't just take everything." "I'm not taking everything," I said calmly. "You are. I've frozen the accounts. Meredith has all the evidence of your financial manipulation, and the courts will see it. You won't get a cent more than what you've already stolen, and I'll be taking full custody of the kids." Her face twisted in anguish. "No, Gary, please. Don't take the kids from me. I made a mistake. I'll fix it. We can fix this." "There's no fixing this, Samantha," I said coldly. "You made your bed, and now you're going to lie in it." She broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably, but I felt no sympathy. I had given her everything, my love, my trust, my life, and she had thrown it all away for some shallow, selfish plan. This was the bed she had made, and now she would have to live with the consequences. I left her there on the couch, broken and crying, while I walked out of the house that had once been our home. There was no going back now, no undoing what had been done. The legal battle would drag on for months, but I had the upper hand, and Samantha knew it. A few days later, I sat in my lawyer Meredith's office, going over the details of the divorce proceedings. We were filing for full custody of the children, and given the evidence of Samantha's affair and financial manipulation, it was highly likely I would win. She wouldn't get much in the settlement either, just a small portion of what remained after the accounts had been frozen. Meredith was confident, but there was still one loose end: Jason. Jason had reached out to me again after our meeting at the tennis courts, claiming he had more information, something about Samantha that I needed to know. I had ignored him at first, but now, with everything coming to light, I wondered if there was more to the story. What else could Samantha have been hiding? I agreed to meet Jason one last time, not because I trusted him, but because I wanted to hear whatever else he had to say. This time, I would be ready for anything. As I pulled into the parking lot of the bar where we had arranged to meet, I felt a strange sense of finality. This was it, the last step in unraveling the web of lies Samantha had spun around me. Jason was waiting at the back table, nursing a drink. He looked worse than before, his face haggard and worn. He glanced up as I approached, nodding in acknowledgement. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," he said, his voice hoarse. "Let's get this over with," I replied, sitting down across from him. "What do you want to tell me?" Jason leaned forward, his eyes dark with exhaustion. "It's about the kids." My stomach dropped. "What about them?" He hesitated, then finally said the words that would shatter what was left of my world. "There's a chance they're not yours." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "What?" "Samantha, she told me a while back after we'd been seeing each other for a while. She said there's a chance the kids might be mine. She wasn't sure." The blood drained from my face, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The kids. My kids. There was a chance they weren't mine? The world seemed to tilt, spinning off its axis as Jason's words echoed in my mind. "There's a chance they're not yours." My throat tightened, my hands trembling on the table as I struggled to process what he had just said. Everything inside me screamed to deny it, to push the possibility out of my mind. But the seed had already been planted, and now it was taking root. "What do you mean?" I finally forced out, my voice barely a whisper. "How long have you known?" Jason looked down at his drink, unable to meet my gaze. "A few months. Samantha, she told me after we'd been seeing each other for a while. She said she wasn't sure, but there was a chance." "A chance?" I repeated, the word like acid on my tongue. I wanted to grab him, shake him, make him explain how something like this could be a question. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead as if trying to alleviate the guilt that weighed on him. "I didn't know how. I didn't want to make things worse. But after everything that's happened, you deserve to know." The anger inside me built, but it was tangled with a deeper, more profound fear. I had spent the past several weeks preparing for a divorce, protecting myself, and seeking revenge against Samantha for her betrayal. But this wasn't something I could have anticipated. My children, the two innocent faces that looked up at me with trust and love, might not be mine. The betrayal had cut deeper than I could ever have imagined. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Jason flinched, but didn't stop me. He knew there was nothing more to say. I turned and left the bar, the suffocating atmosphere trailing behind me as I stepped into the cold night air. As I drove home, my mind raced. I had always loved my children, no matter what. They were the light in the dark moments, the reason I pushed through the worst days. But now, a shadow loomed over that love, a doubt that threatened to tear everything apart. Could I live with that uncertainty? Could I bear to look at them and wonder if they weren't mine, if they were the result of Samantha's betrayal? When I got home, the house was dark and quiet. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring into the emptiness. Samantha was staying with her friend now, but the kids were asleep in their rooms, unaware of the storm brewing in the heart of their father. I couldn't bring myself to go upstairs and look at them, not while this doubt gnawed at my insides. I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands as the weight of everything finally crashed down on me. The divorce, the affair, the manipulation, it had all been devastating. But this uncertainty about my own children felt like the cruelest cut of all. Hours passed in the darkness, and I lost track of time. My thoughts spiraled, moving from anger to sadness and back again. What if Jason was right? What if the kids weren't mine? Did it even matter? Or was the bond one had with them something that transcended blood? Could I still be their father, even if the DNA didn't match? At some point, I found myself holding my phone, staring at the number for the DNA testing service I had used before. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I couldn't press it. The truth was within reach, but I wasn't sure I could handle it. Would knowing the truth really change anything? Or would it only deepen the wound that was already too raw to heal? The next morning, I was still sitting on the couch when I heard soft footsteps padding down the stairs. My daughter, Emily, appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Daddy," she whispered, her small voice pulling me from my tortured thoughts. I looked up at her, my heart aching as I took in her innocent face. She didn't know anything about the chaos swirling around her, about the lies, the betrayal. She was just my little girl, and in that moment, it didn't matter who her biological father was. She was mine. I opened my arms, and she ran to me, curling up on my lap like she always did. I held her tightly, feeling the warmth of her small body against mine, the steady rhythm of her breathing as she rested her head on my chest. Tears stung my eyes, but I held them back. "I love you, Emily," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "No matter what." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and trusting. "I love you too, Daddy." In that moment, I realized the truth didn't matter. DNA, biology, none of it changed the fact that I was her father. I had been there for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every moment of her life. That was what made me her dad, not some test result. But the path ahead was uncertain. Samantha's betrayal had shattered our lives, and the future was murky at best. There would be legal battles, painful confrontations, and perhaps more revelations that I wasn't ready for. But I would face them all because, despite everything, I still had my children. The truth about their paternity might never be fully known, but in my heart, they were mine. And that was enough for me. As I sat there, holding Emily close, I realized that life would never be the same again. The wounds of betrayal would take time to heal, and the future was fraught with uncertainty. But for now, in this quiet moment, I held on to what mattered most.